Hey!
Welcome back to Historia.
I'm Kylie.
I'm Jamie.
And we're here to bring you a nice history lesson.
I don't know what you're doing.
It's a person.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
When was the last person we did?
I feel like it's been a minute.
Yeah.
That's why I was like...
Jean Lafitte?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, it's time to do a person. I love, like, hearing people's life stories. I think it's so interesting. Especially when they end up being, like, successful, like, well-known,
Yeah.
I should say, people. So, I think, should we just jump in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So, recently, we talked about 2023.
Yeah.
And the biggest movie of December was Wonka. Have you seen Wonka?
No.
Oh!
I've seen the old Charlie and the Chocolate Factories.
It actually wasn't as good as I thought it'd be, which is kind of sad, but it was pretty good. It was just crazy. It was crazy. So, yeah, that's a little hint into who I'm talking about today.
Was he a real person?
No. I'm talking about the author.
Oh, yeah,
Charlie
it was a
Chocolate
book.
Factory. Yeah, Roald Dahl.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about him today because I've always been fascinated by, like, children's authors specifically because, like, you know, they have to be in a different mindset than other authors.
Yeah, literally.
And what's really interesting about Roald, I remember I took, when I was in college, I was an education major, so I had to take a lot of classes about, like, children's literature. And we did, like, little biographies where, like, we got to talk about a different author. And I remember his story was just really fascinating because he didn't start off as a children's author. Kind of happened in the future. So he has a pretty interesting story and a lot of well-known work that is outside of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But, of course, that is probably his most well-known book.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to be talking about the history of Roald Dahl. So my sources come from BBC. Always has some good information. There was a documentary that was created in 2016 from the BBC website. And then biography.com, can't go wrong, gives you the info about the people's lives. RoaldDahl.com, obviously. He has his own website. It has, you know, all of his books listed there. You can buy his books on his website, but it also had a little biography there too. And then Britannica. So... whether you are a young, naive child still learning about the world, or you are an adult that loves to escape the real world and explore your imagination, Roald Dahl's books are for you. He allowed the reader to attach to unique characters, and they never knew where the stories would go, but what led to him writing a book about a young schoolgirl named Matilda, or a book about a chocolate factory.
Holy shit, he wrote Matilda?
He did.
What?
Isn't that crazy? I didn't realize that either. Yeah.
Damn.
I know. Yeah. He's got a range.
Yeah.
But all of his books are about, like, using your imagination and, like, kind of stories that you don't see often, of course, that children like. So let's talk about him. Born on September 13th, 1916 in Llandaff, Wales, to Norwegian parents, Dahl grew up to be very mischievous and rambunctious and would spend summer vacations with them, with his grandparents in Oslo. So a lot of times his parents would be like, I don't want to deal with him anymore. We're going to send him off. So we don't know too much about his childhood other than the fact that it was a pretty rough time. A lot of his family was getting sick a lot of the times, and his father actually died when he was 4 years old from pneumonia.
Oh, God.
And what's even worse is the fact that he lost his older sister, Astrid, in 1920. She was only 7 years old, and she died from appendicitis. His father actually died right after that. So it was like 2 deaths in one. Just quick. So sad. But when he was 7, he was forced to go to a proper boys' school, and it was Llandaff Cathedral School. And I think losing like 2 family members that fast probably led to a lot of like behavior problems in school.
100%.
But now he was forced to go to more of like a strict school. And in that school, there was a sweet shop, which is really fascinating. But you could actually go to the sweet shop and like buy candy there. And there was a grumpy old lady that worked there. And she would always be like, I'm watching you. Him and his friends would come in and just like cause problems, you know, going through all the glasses of candy. And she's just like, don't steal it, you know, just that typical like grumpy old lady. And while he was in school at the cathedral one day, him and his friends noticed a loose floorboard just in one of the classrooms. So they picked it up and they found a dead mouse under it. They then decided to put the mouse in one of the sweets so the lady would grab it. Yeah.
Oh my God. Children are the worst.
I know, right? So they all left for the sweet shop and she stood behind the counter and watched them. She could kind of tell that they were like up to something mischievous and she's like, what are they doing? And then they ended up dropping the mouse in one of the glasses of sweets, like candy in there. So she obviously like saw them do this.
Yeah.
And they had really bad consequences. The headmaster beat them, basically, like spanked them. Oh, you could do that back then. And so, yeah, the headmaster was not messing around, just spanking the shit out of them. And I actually, in the documentary in 2016, they used a lot of clips of Roald kind of getting interviewed. And he has a very interesting perspective on a lot of things. Very, like, what's the word? A lot of people don't agree with him on a lot of things. What's the word I'm thinking of? Controversial. Yeah. So a lot of his opinions are controversial and he's been in the news recently for like a lot of his books being, we'll talk about it later. But that's kind of what made me want to research him is because of like the controversy behind him. But yeah, he has some interesting quotes. And this is one that he said, vicious people are more interesting than nice. A book full of nothing but nice people is boring.
I mean, he's
got
wrong.
a point. Yeah. So he always likes to.
People love villains.
Exactly. Yeah. So he likes to kind of create those characters that are not like always nice, but not always mean. And if you kind of look at Willy Wonka, you kind of see that a little bit. Obviously, he's more good than bad, but there is a side to him that's like manipulative.
Literally, he's letting these kids just like get blown up.
Yeah.
Almost.
So if you've ever watched Matilda, the schoolmaster was inspired by the lady from the sweet shop.
I was thinking that.
Yep. So following this prank, his mom decided to transfer him to a boarding school called St. Peter's. She was like, I've had enough of this. You need to fix your behavior. We're going to take you to a more strict school.
Yo, okay.
I don't think that's going to work. It didn't. Because then he was later transferred to Repton, a private school that was known for academic excellence.
Wow.
So she just keeps trying these new schools. She's like, one of them is going to work for him. I just know it. Yeah, exactly. And he never liked to follow the rules while there. He simply ached for adventure. He was constantly just daydreaming about like being somewhere else. And he didn't really care too much about education because he just wanted to travel the world. That was like his big goal. So he wasn't too focused in school. In school, they'd give the kids a box of chocolates from a factory to try and rate them from 1 to 10. So there was like a factory nearby and they would allow the kids to try out the candies and let them know like opinions on the flavors that they created. So he loved that day. Like it would happen like once a month or so and they would just get to try different kinds of chocolate. His daughter Lucy later went on to express Willy Wonka is very similar to his father in just the like mannerisms that he has. His personality is very similar. The way that he like talks to people is similar. So when she saw the movie and read the book, she was like, wow, this is him. So that's kind of interesting. But he truly believed there should be no limit to your creativity. And when he'd try the chocolates, he would think about how someone's job is to literally come up with new flavors and work in a factory full of chocolate as an adult.
Wow.
Which, you know, I mean, as a kid, you're like, wow, that's someone's job. Literally. I want that. Literally. So that always fascinated him. And that really led to, obviously, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because he was just like captivated by that idea of working in a chocolate factory and trying new flavors of chocolate. So he hardly excelled as a student, but his mother agreed to pay for his tuition at Oxford or Cambridge University when he graduated. So his exact quote when she said that to him was, "No, thank you. I want to go straight from school to work for a company that will send me to wonderful faraway places like Africa or China." So
interesting.
Yeah, just that quote alone sounds like something Willy Wonka would say.
Right.
But yeah, he's just kind of like, Mom, that's great, but I don't really want to go to college. I think I'd rather just go travel somewhere.
Good for him.
He really liked Africa. That was like his dream place to be. So Once he graduated Repton in 1932, he went on an expedition to Newfoundland, and he then took a job with the Shell Oil Company in Tanzania, Africa, working there for 7 years. So he got to go to Africa. Dreams came true.
Damn.
Yeah. And at this point, there weren't commercial airplanes, so there was something exciting about taking a boat. And I think that's why, like, so many kids at that age were fascinated by the idea of adventure traveling, because they'd have to really go through and explore and make a whole year out of it. Whereas now you could just go get a flight, you know.
It'll bring you there in 2 days.
Yeah. So very different times, but that idea fascinated him, just being able to explore and go from like one place to the next. During his time in Africa, he absolutely loved it. And once he wrote a letter to his mom about the black mamba snake, and he watched his friend kill one with a rake. So he was, he knew about the snakes, but he was looking out the window and he saw one of his friends raking. And then there was a snake kind of sneaking up on him. So he was like, hey, just so you know, like, this is happening. And his friend literally just turned around with a rake and stabbed it.
Oh my God.
It was like, skill. But he ended up using that for inspiration for a future book. It was about like Africa. I think it was a crocodile book. So he used his experiences from this for that. And then in 1939, Dahl joined the Air Force and trained in Kenya as a World War II fighter pilot. When he was serving in the Mediterranean, he crash landed in Alexandria, Egypt, and this caused a serious injury to his skull, spine, and hip.
Oh,
yeah. And he had a lot of survivor guilt, as many that day died, and he wrote about them. He would actually keep a list of like everyone who he knew that was, you know, in the same ranking as him and everything he was close to. He kept a list of names and then would cross them out when they would die. So it was kind of sad. But he was very into like journaling and like keeping record of everything. And so, yeah, that's kind of fun. You can still see like pictures of his old writing and stuff.
Wow.
But after having a hip replacement and 2 spinal surgeries, he was transferred to Washington, D.C., where he worked as an assistant air attaché. And this is when he began writing. Oh. So it's actually a really interesting story how he became an author.
Literally.
He never had a desire to write. Like, didn't enjoy school, let alone writing.
Yeah.
But after his injury, he didn't know what to do. He's like, what do I do? I'm just like stuck here. I'm trying to heal. I can't really travel like this. I can't really like be in the military right now. So he just didn't know what to do. And someone knocked on his door one day and asked if he could come in. Just this random guy. What? And he wanted to take him to lunch to talk about his journey in the war since he was an author. So this guy was like, hey, I'm an author. I'd like to hear your story. Can we go meet for lunch? And he's like, sure. So he made it very clear that they ate roasted duck, if you're curious. And he noticed that the guy was having a hard time taking notes while eating. So Roald was basically like, hey, you know what? Let's just focus on eating, kind of like talking right now. And then I'm going to write all of the information down for you, and I'll give it to you when I'm done. So basically, like, I'm just going to write down a synopsis, and then you can write a book from it. And he's like, okay, yeah, perfect. So then they just ended up finishing their lunch. And then he later went on to write all of the information he could think of that went on with his experience and sent it to him. And the guy was so impressed that Dahl had written a whole story and not just notes. He was expecting like bullet point notes, but like Dahl had already written like a whole article. And so he's just like, holy shit. And so he's like, let's just keep it this, like how it is. And I'll just give you the money for it. Like, I'll give you a certain percentage of the money if you let me like take this. And so, yeah, he offered to sell his version of the story and give Dahl profits. And it was a short story called Shot Down Over Libya. If you ever want to read it, it's there. It's out there. So, yeah, but you could already sense his use of imagination in that story, just the way that he like painted everything.
Yeah. And
this was just supposed to be notes about his experience, but he was just like really good at like taking in what he was seeing, what he was hearing.
Observing.
Like painting a picture. So, yeah, everyone was very impressed by that once that came out. And then later, Walt Disney read the story. Walt Disney wanted to meet with him about his story he wrote about gremlins. It's not a kid story, but it was about like these like creepy little gremlins that would sneak up on like fighter pilots, and they would like sneak up on your airplane and try to like tear it down and stuff. And Walt was very inspired by that. It was like, we should make a movie. So they talked for a while. Roald met with Walt's artists and told them what he imagined the gremlins to look like. And the film at that point didn't get finished, but Disney published a book based off of Roald's original story about a gremlin helping a pilot. It was published in 1943, and then later on there was a movie, The Gremlins.
Wow.
So that was inspired by him.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's an interesting little facet there, but that obviously got his name spread more. And then Eleanor Roosevelt would read The Gremlins to her children, and they loved it. So they invited Roald to the White House.
Whoa.
Yeah. And many considered him a spy, but he doesn't call himself that. In the interview, they're like, are you a spy?
What?
Because he would go back and forth, you know. The British and Americans weren't meshing. So as Roald got closer to the president and he was like spending a lot of time there.
Oh, yeah.
He was working in DC. So he like became buddies with the president. He would then bring back like all the info to the British. So that's why people call him a spy.
Wow.
But he's like, no, I would never. Like in his interviews. It's so funny. With his little British accent. But Roald got to know the author of James Bond, Ian Lancaster Fleming, and Ian later on even asked Roald for help with writing his screenplay, You Only Live Twice, in 1967.
Wow.
So he helped write that. And so he's really getting his name out. Like Walt Disney, the president, James Bond author.
Literally.
And when involved in the film world, he met actress Patricia Neal, and they connected and fell in love. They went on to get married in 1953.
Oh.
So, yeah. In the 50s and 60s, he continued writing short stories, including Kiss Kiss and Someone Like You. Those two became bestsellers, so that's why they're mentioned. But in 1970, Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected came out, and it was basically like different situations that could happen. It's like a sort of like a TV show, a short TV show. And it was like situations that were crazy, like a wife getting murdered by her husband, and then like her husband ends up like feeding her for dinner. Or no, she murdered the husband, so she feeds him for dinner, invites people over. Like just crazy concepts. But there was always something interesting that he created. So he was like using his short stories in ways of like film, kind of bringing them to life. And one thing about him that a lot of people noticed is he preferred being around women more than men. So his family, he had his wife, he had like his mom, his sisters, like they would all come over and everything, and his aunts. There was just like not men in his life, just a lot of women. But that allowed him to really like understand feelings easier.
Yeah.
And it allowed them to support him as well. And they weren't hard on him. Like, you need to go get a hard job, you know, because like women are more understanding and they like the creativity, you know, usually, especially during this time, I should say.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I think if his dad was around, there might be like more of a standard there. But yeah, they encouraged his creativity, which is good. So he decided to settle down in Macedon, I think is what it's called, when his journey of children's book writing began. It helped him be able to express his feelings and to make them understandable to kids. It helped him understand himself, because when you're really like describing how a character feels or the setting of a place, it helps you understand it easier yourself. So he really liked that connection there. And so he published James and the Giant Peach in 1961.
No freaking way.
I know, isn't that crazy?
That's wild.
Yeah, which later led to a Disney movie in 1996. Very well-known story. And 3 years after that story, he published Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, in which some critics have accused him of portraying a racist stereotype with the Oompa Loompa characters. But yeah, that came out in 1964. And then he published Fantastic Mr. Fox in 1970.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm telling you, just these big names.
Literally.
And this became a movie in 2009. It took a while, but that was also a very popular story. In 1971, the original movie version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was created, and Roald wrote the screenplay for it. And he had very high hopes. But he was actually very disappointed because Gene Wilder wasn't weird enough. He thought Gene Wilder was a really bad Wonka.
Yeah, that is like everybody's favorite. That's hilarious.
Yeah, there was this, I didn't write down the actor, but he was expecting this like specific actor to play him who like gave off more weird vibes. But when they tried it as him, nobody else liked him. Everyone was like, we want Gene. And he's just like, so I'm sure eventually he like grew on him, but in the beginning he's like, no, he needs to be more weird. I understand too. I feel like if you're writing a book, it's probably really hard to find a person that fits your image exactly.
100%,
right?
yeah.
You know, like, but he experienced a lot of tragedy in his family life during this time. They ended up having 5 kids, so him and Patricia. Dang. They had Olivia. She died of a stroke at age 7 in 1962. Yeah. Tessa, Theo, Lucy, and Ophelia. I love the names of their children. They're so cute.
They're so elegant.
I know. Theo had a health condition, and it was a head injury. There was too much spinal fluid that caused pressure in the brain. And so he had a tube that would drain the fluid to put it in the right spot, basically. Roald knew of an inventor he used to fly model airplanes with named Stanley Wade. He's an engineer. And he helped Roald invent a new valve with the head of neurosurgery helping them out. So they were trying to come up with a way that would make it more so the kids would have a normal childhood and they wouldn't have to be connected to tubes all the time. So he wanted Theo to have a normal childhood, and the valve that he ended up creating with Stanley Wade and the neurosurgeon saved the life of thousands around the world, including his own son.
Damn.
Yeah. And he never charged for it. So he was willing to give it to whoever needed it and never asked for money because it was just like he wanted to help other families in need.
Well, yeah, especially when your own family's going through it.
Exactly. He knew how it felt. So I really love that. I think that's great. But 2 years after that was when Olivia died. So it was like a lot at once. He's trying to help, save the life of one of his kids, and then his other kid dies. It's very tragic. But 3 years later, his wife had a stroke while filming a movie. She couldn't speak, walk, or write, and she was out for 2 weeks and in the hospital for a month. She was 3 months pregnant at the time with Lucy and had 2 more strokes. Jeez. Somehow Lucy survived and she was able to give birth.
Oh my God.
I know. Isn't that crazy? And the crazy thing about this is right before she had a stroke, she just won an Oscar for Best Actress. So,
dang.
Yeah. After this happened, he flew his family to England and got everyone he knew to help teach Pat how to move and talk again. So he was basically like, he wanted her to be able to get back to normal as fast as possible. And she really couldn't like speak or walk or anything. So in the interview, she actually made a joke about how she learned how to walk and talk with her newborn baby, which is interesting. But Patricia would make up words and Roald would write them down. So she would just say crazy things and he would be like, okay. And he made a whole list of crazy words and he used some in future books.
Wow.
One of them was the Big Friendly Giant, BFG, also known as, in 1982. The movie was made in 2016 and this is one of his most famous books. And in that book, he has a lot of like nonsense words that were created by his wife, learning how to talk again.
Oh my gosh.
So, and then he created The Witches in 1983, which had a movie in 1990. It's very similar to like Hocus Pocus vibes, but I've never seen it or read it, so I don't know. Then Matilda in 1988. The movie came out in 1996, and then a remake in 2022 with the musical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Most of his children's books were inspired by bedtime stories he would tell his kids. So he once said, you have to know what children like. So he would just like kind of use them as test objects. Like,
I mean,
yeah, it makes sense. You might as well, like you have the kids, you might as well use them for something. I'm just kidding. But he would tell a story of the chocolate factory and see like how captivated they are, like what questions they would have. And then he would use that to help edit his writing, which is really good. I like that.
Yeah.
And he ended up writing 19 children's books over his decades-long career.
That's wild.
Yeah. He also was still writing some short stories for adult audiences at the same time. And Dahl and Patricia eventually divorced in 1983. I'm guessing she probably, changed a lot after the stroke and everything. And maybe they just tried really hard to make it work. And, some people just aren't meant to be, and that's fine. But soon after, he went on to marry Felicity Ann Crossland. And he probably knew when the end was coming because he wrote a book about a child riding on a bird's wing. And this was his last book called The Minpins. At the end of that story, there's a quote, "If you don't believe in magic, you'll never find it." And that seems to be like the best way to kind of summarize the way that he wrote and just like how he thought about things. So he ended up dying on November 23rd, 1990 at the age of 74. After suffering an infection. It's unknown what type of infection. But Dahl has been known to be controversial due to aspects of his writing. There's been a lot of like racial and sexual stereotypes in his writing. But honestly, it's not so much his writing, it's more so his interviews. And his nonfiction writing. So like not so much like the children's stories, but when he's like telling stories of what happened to him, he just uses words that maybe he shouldn't use or outdated things. But that's where a lot of people can kind of see his true colors as they think. And in the 1980s and even after his death, opinions he had were released with anti-Semitic opinions. So, but he defended himself by saying he was anti-Israel. But no one was like accepting that. So his estate published an apology in 2020. I'm going to read it real quick. It's on his website and it just kind of shows like basically like they're just apologizing for some of the shit he said.
Wow.
Since he's dead, you know. So it says, the Dahl family and the Roald Dahl Story Company deeply apologize for the lasting and understandable hurt caused by Roald Dahl's anti-Semitic statements. Those prejudiced remarks are incomprehensible to us and stand in marked contrast to the man we knew and to the values of the heart of Roald Dahl stories, which have positively impacted young people for generations. We hope that just as he did at his best, at his absolute worst, Roald Dahl can help remind us of the lasting impacts of words.
Wow.
So that's a nice little statement. It's like we all make mistakes, but just, you know, let's remember him for the good.
Wow.
Yeah. So in 2023, actually, his publishers ended up announcing that they had revised hundreds of insensitive and outdated passages. So that's kind of what led me to want to talk about him, is because I saw that in my like recap thing that they were working on that and kind of like fighting back to get rid of a lot of his books. They ended up just editing them. But like, I get it, but it's also history and I don't know, it's kind of hard to change all of that. I think if you're reading one of the books and you notice something like that, just have that conversation with your kid.
Literally.
Instead of having to go get a new version of the book. But that's just me.
That's the woke generation for you.
Yeah. So anyway, that's Roald Dahl. Short and sweet. He really was not like, you know, he lived like a pretty like simple life, wrote books, was in the military, but there wasn't a lot of like drama and stuff. He just kind of did what he loved to do and made a lot of famous stories.
He just kept stumbling upon different things and was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Schoolmaster, Matilda, chocolate. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
all right, where can you find us?
You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at History of the Podcast. You can email us at historyofthepodcast@gmail.com. And we will have a new episode next Monday.
Yes, we will.
So thank you so much for listening, and
we'll catch you next week.
Your words matter. Don't forget. Don't be anti-Semitic. Okay, goodbye.
Wow.